Hi. Yeah, Cine Lumet. When the Oscar-winning filmmaker passed away last month at the age of 86, I was tasked with writing an appreciation, which wasn't hard. I'm a big fan of his, and he was very prolific, and there's a lot of work there to appreciate. That said, any true Lumet aficionado can tell you that, you know, for every masterpiece like Network, there is a kind of failure like Critical Care. For every Serpico, there's The Wiz. For every great crime drama like Dog Day Afternoon, there is the kind of a bad crime drama like Family Business. I mean, Cine Lumet made two great courtroom films, 12 Angry Men and The Verdict, with Henry Fonda and Paul Newman, respectively. And then he turned around and he made Guilty as Sin and Find Me Guilty with Don Johnson and Vin Diesel. You know, so clearly, you know, the more I investigated, the more this phenomenon troubled me. And, you know, I'm not here to speak ill of the dead at all. He was an amazing filmmaker. He had a long career, 60 years in film and TV. He made 45 features. He won an honorary Oscar a few years ago. He wrote one of the best books ever about filmmaking called Making Movies. I highly recommend you check it out. But, you know, that said, I am here to propose a very simple theory, that there is such a thing as working too much. I'm not talking about working too hard. That's a totally different concept that we can discuss next year at 7x7 if you want. But, you know, we're all creatives here for the most part, and we all realize that, you know, we can't always pick and choose how and when we want to work. The economics get involved, and we can't always pick and choose how our work is seen. Thus, what I call the Lumet Conundrum, which basically is the imperative to work versus the imperative to work well. And it is a, you know, it's a paradox that's kind of affected, you know, it's a question that we have to ask ourselves all the way up the upper echelons of creativity, which is basically, what do we want from our artists? That they deliver on our expectations with work that is selective and inspired, or that they continuously take risks on work that, percentage-wise anyhow, cannot always pay off. I know it's a very wide spectrum. There are a lot of places we can fall in there, but history provides some examples that I think might be kind of instructive. The gang who quit while they were ahead. The guy or the guys who wrote the Bible. You know, whatever you believe in that. I mean, you know, I'd probably retire after that one myself. You know, one and out. I mean, that is the bestseller. Charles Laughton, the actor, he won an Oscar for acting, but he made one film as a director, The Night of the Hunter, in 1955 with Robert Mitchum and Lillian Gish, and it was a masterpiece, one of the best films of the 50s, arguably one of the best films of the last 60 years, but he did not direct after that, in fact. He died in 62, so that kind of, you know, cut it short a little bit, but that said, you know, in those 7 years, as a film goer, I feel kind of, you know, deprived. I would have liked another Laughton film in there somewhere. The Few, the Proud. This is a group that made the most of a little bit more work than the group ahead we just talked about. Ayn Rand, we can talk about her ideology, her philosophy, whether she could actually write or not. But, you know, I think she realized something very important in her lifetime, which is that subpar work dilutes your influence. It compromises your influence and your legacy. Terrence Malick and Stanley Kubrick were, you know, Malick is still alive, but there are a couple filmmakers with reputations as these kind of hermetic perfectionists. They don't work that often, and, you know, they're very selective, and that's, you know, but that's good. And in fairness, Kubrick worked more frequently early in his career. Malick works more frequently now. He has a film coming out next week, The Tree of Life. But, you know, when you work that selectively, what happens is it kind of confers an event status to your work, which can only be a good thing. The Beatles, yes, they did a lot of work in a very short period of time, it's true. And they broke up under dubious circumstances. Was it ego? Was it Yoko? I don't know. I don't care, because Let It Be is the perfect capstone, the logical end to a band that was just obsessed with creative exploration and evolution. Then there's the problematically prolific. I think this speaks for itself. Andy Warhol, I mean, his studio was called The Factory, you know? He couldn't even, in the end, be bothered to piss on his own urine paintings. He had to outsource that. You know, Bob Dylan, you know, Dylan's kind of a catchy, or a touchy, you know, a touchy case because, he's a recording artist, and like many authors, he has a contract that obligates him to certain amounts of work in a certain period of time. That said, we can blame Columbia perhaps for some of that 80s output, like Down on the Groove, but I don't think anyone at Columbia held a gun to his head in 2009 when he made that Christmas record and said, Bob, we need a Christmas record. Joyce Carol Oates is the quintessential example of someone who really needs to curb her dog. She has actually written in the past about how she resents having to make a choice between being taken seriously or being prolific. But the reality is, if you don't have something that's ready to go, you just don't publish it. She publishes enough otherwise. She won a National Book Award. I mean, she's Joyce Carol Oates. So anyway, that's kind of mitigated her influence a little bit. Here's the sweet spot. This is the thing we can all aim for. Shakespeare, fine, he's Shakespeare. He's a genius, he's the bard, that's great. But that said, and he probably even has a couple of duds sprinkled in among his sonnets. And so that said, he realized something very important. He worked a relatively short period of time historically, like 25, 26 years, something like that. And I think every time out, he knew that he had to advance the craft. He had to push it a little bit further every time. In that sense, he's the creative ideal, because I don't think there was ever a time when Shakespeare sat down and didn't think he was changing the game. Whether writing a common history like Julius Caesar, writing a love story, Romeo and Juliet. I mean, these are masterworks. And every time out, he said, how do I push it a little bit further? I think Herzog and Scorsese, again, filmmakers, are interesting cases. I actually asked Herzog a couple weeks ago. He was doing press for a documentary. And I said, what's your favorite film of yours? There's so many. And he said, I don't have one. I said, what's your least favorite film then? I mean, you must have something you take back or want to do over. He said, no, I don't have one of those either. In fact, I actually like the failures a little bit more, much like a mother might like a child a little bit more who has an impediment. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think this reflects in some of Scorsese's work as well, in that these guys, they're master filmmakers. We'll give them that. But, first and foremost, they're master enthusiasts, and that is infectious. That gets into the viewing process and the consuming process of all work, I think, for us as filmgoers, as readers, as consumers of media. So finally, what have we learned? We are, I think this is what we can kind of surmise, what we should maybe try and aspire to. The occasional masterpiece, the occasional misfire, the occasional curio, but nothing less than inspired and nothing less than ambitious, because work for its own sake rarely, if ever, yields longevity. So I know what you're thinking. History might be on our side, economics or not. We got to work. I understand. We got to feed our families. Totally get it. But, here's the thing. I mean, theoretically anyway, better work begets more lucrative work, right? Which, in theory, can beget less work. So maybe the cliche is worth considering. Less is more. Lumet, as a technician, as a filmmaker, his best movies, taught us that virtue. They proved it, even if his career as a whole does not. So we can and should take note. That's it. Thank you very much.